Your Creative Push, episode 275.
It happened because we made it happen and we set a date, and the second you set a date, everything falls into line and the job gets done.
Welcome to Your Creative Push, the podcast that pushes you to pursue your creative passions. I'm your host, Youngman Brown, and my guest today is Paul Adshead. Paul is a hat wearer, a beard owner, a crazy golf enthusiast, and a peanut butter fan, but more importantly, he is a talented photographer, and he also uses old, out-of-date film and even older antique cameras to attempt to capture the past as he attends and photographs World War, Victorian, and American Civil War events. And he comes on the show today for a powerful episode to talk about his own creative path, his own creative resistances. He talks about how he never studied photography or even took creative courses academically, and how he has made very slow transitions in his artistic career and how that should not be a problem for you as well. He talks about the different types of darkness in his work, as well as how he leaves things to people's imaginations. Paul talks about the thought and planning that goes into each and every one of his shoots, and also the power of brevity and how less is often more. Paul discusses his long-standing love for history and the way that he tries to recreate that history in his art. He talks about the antique cameras in which he uses and what that does for his process and his mindset as he switches things up. And he talks about his Instagram descriptions and how he uses them to help to add value to his pieces and to give the viewer additional information about his process. And finally, Paul talks about the relationship that he has with his own resistances and also some of his tips for getting past those resistances, such as having multiple projects going on at once and also using Parkinson's law to his own advantage. Just a great talk with Paul. I don't know what I loved more, what he said or how he said it with his awesome accent, but either way, I know that you are going to enjoy it and be inspired by my guest today, the wonderful Paul Adshead. Paul, welcome to Your Creative Push.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks for being here, man. It's a pleasure to kind of finally meet you, meet you,
That's good.
and get you on the show. So I'm really looking forward to this. But I always like to give my guests an opportunity to have the stage to set the scene, how you kind of got to the point you are today in your creative career.
Right. So yeah, there's three points about my kind of career path that I always like to tell people, and I get a lot of pleasure out of telling people. Is one that, even though I'm a professional photographer, I didn't actually study photography. Two is that even though I'm obviously a creative person, I didn't actually do creative courses academically. And three, I've always kind of transitioned into different phases of my life and career very slowly rather than jumping into things head first. So if we go way back to when I was like 14 at school, that was kind of the time when we started to be able to pick courses and decide, where, we could kind of start specializing in certain things. So for me, even at that young age, I still didn't know, like a lot of kids, I didn't know what I wanted to do in life. So the two courses that I picked was history and business studies. So it's interesting when I kind of draw lines back to my career now. All the kind of courses that I kind of picked throughout my life have kind of informed and shaped the artist who I am today. But even back then, I still didn't really know what I wanted to be. But what I did know even back then at 14 was that I always knew that I was going to pick courses and do things that I wanted to do in life. I wanted to pick things that interested me and that I was passionate about. And that's still something that I kind of tell people today, especially people who are kind of at crossroads and stuff, is that you really need to be doing things in life that you're passionate about and that you are actually interested in. You shouldn't be chasing the money, and you shouldn't be, doing things for other people. You need to be kind of authentic to yourself. So even back then at 14, there wasn't many choices to pick from, but I picked history and business studies. So if we fast forward a little bit, when I got to kind of 16, here in the UK, we do a couple of years at college. and still no kind of signs of art or anything like that. I didn't do art at school. I did IT and 3D design, which is kind of like product and things like that, and film studies. They're the three courses that I did when I was kind of 16, 17, 18. So it's starting to kind of see maybe a little bit of hint of creativity with kind of product design, and a little bit of kind of an entry level into kind of the world of film. But it was more kind of just like watching loads of films and studying it. But it was they were the first kind of hints of me kind of starting to be a little bit creative. But still no sign of photography and still no actual fine art or any kind of creative thing. But they were the courses that I was interested in and the subjects that I was interested in at the time. So after that, when I did a foundation year, because I was at a crossroads and I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to do in my life. And a foundation year is basically a year where you do various different disciplines in the kind of art world, kind of some painting, you do a little bit of photography, a bit of design and sculpture, and some fabric and textile design. And after a few weeks of doing each of them, you decide to specialize for the rest of the year in whichever creative you want to do. And as I had never done any art before, this was kind of my entry into the kind of art world. And I really enjoyed it. I did painting and things like that, learned about composition and stuff. But even then, I had the opportunity to do photography, to kind of major for that year in photography, and I didn't choose it. The tutors kind of persuaded me not to do it, I think mainly because it was oversubscribed. And I ended up going with 3D design and sculpture. So I did a year of creating these weird, crazy sculptures and stuff, and some interesting stories attached to them. So yeah, that kind of gets me to the kind of like 20 mark. Because I'd kind of done a little bit of an art-based course, then I had the opportunity to do a degree for 3 years. And then I did something called interactive arts, which is under the fine art umbrella, but actually it was a very, very loose course. We didn't actually do, we weren't really taught about fine art. It was just kind of 3 years to kind of do anything you wanted creatively. And so that was good and bad in some respects, because obviously you was free to do anything you wanted and whatnot. But it was very inspiring time for me, because the studios where we used to work, every single artist that was in there was doing very, very different disciplines. So you would have people that were doing like 3D animation, you'd be doing people doing sculptures and painting. So it was a really great melting pot. And for me, someone who's always been quite visually interested in the world, it was a great time for inspiration. But even then, during the 3 years of my interactive arts degree, I didn't actually I did a little bit of photography, but I actually did filmmaking. So I used to make like short films and music videos for people and things like that. And so not really picked up a camera even then. And that's kind of where my academic career ends, because I graduated from university and then I was in the real world. At that point, I decided that I was interested wanted to maybe pursue a career in photography. And I was lucky enough to get a job in a photography studio, a commercial photography studio, just start at the bottom and kind of worked my way up. And it was a great foundation again to learn, but I didn't actually have the skills that I needed at the time to even do the job. I'm not even sure actually how I actually got the job, but that was it was a really good foundation for me. And I did 3 years in that job and learned a lot. After that, I decided to go freelance as a freelance photographer. And I did that for several years. And then after that, I kind of transitioned to being a fine artist. And that's kind of where I am today. But the thing I said at the start about kind of transitioning slowly, I've kind of always transitioned. So with the when I had a studio job, I actually had a full-time job as a photographer. I transitioned slowly. So when I realized that I wanted to be a freelancer, I went part-time as a studio photographer, and then transitioned slowly out of that. And then once I was a freelance photographer and I realized that I want to be a full-time fine art photographer, I did that very slowly as well. Because, you have to be realistic about these things. And I think if you kind of jump into some things feet first, sometimes it can go wrong. So I've kind of, that's kind of my path. I've kind of slowly transitioned into things. And that's kind of where I am today. But for me, I find it interesting in that, my work kind of quite cinematic, and I kind of build things and all this stuff. And if you kind of look back at the courses that I just described during my, really informative years as a student, even though you would never kind of pin them down as being the kind of courses that you'd maybe attribute to a fine art photographer, every single one has got components in it which I actually use today. And I think because I, back at 14, decided I'm just going to do things that I want to do and I'm interested in and I like, it's kind of paid off, and it's kind of become this, that was all a melting pot, and it really helped to navigate me into the world and into the person that I am today.
Yeah, it's always fun to see how people's pasts inform their future. And I'm always promoting that idea of slow transitions into things. It's fun to dive headfirst into things. I think as far as like gaining knowledge and like trying things out. But when it comes to either making money or making a career out of something, it's always a good idea, I think, to take baby steps and to kind of slowly, dip your toes into the water to see what it's like and slowly move into that.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's great to hear that you kind of advocate that as well. And it is, obviously, especially in the financial kind of climate that we're in, in my opinion, it's very dangerous to kind of, go in things quite aggressively, because it can be a risk. And for me, I was always aware professionally that, I know we're all kind of interested in brands and stuff, but let's face it, we all are brands nowadays. We've all got kind of digital presences online, and we need to portray the right sort of messages. And if you do certain things, or you in your career, you do have to sometimes may face the repercussions of it. So I think it's better to kind of just gauge these things. And you do see these kind of romantic stories that people have of becoming artists overnight, or becoming successes and becoming wealthy overnight. But it's very, very few, and you do have to be very realistic about these things. And if you can transition, you can kind of gauge how things are, and just make the best of both worlds, really.
Now, tell me a little bit about the difference between your freelance work and your personal work.
Yeah, I mean, I don't do much commercial work these days. I've managed to kind of carefully transition out of that. But my work, as you know, is quite dark and kind of cinematic. To be honest, a lot of clients don't like it because probably a bit too much for them. But for me, I personally never like to kind of compromise my style and compromise my side of it. So it's very different. Like I said, the commercial work is more kind of a lot cleaner, a lot less narrative based. In the commercial world, you kind of more like, because you're obviously selling something, and things need to be a lot more kind of black and white, so to speak. So they're actually quite different stylistically. But I used that myself to help navigate me towards the kind of world that I wanted to be in, because it's crazy that even though I was in the commercial world and everything, you would think, well, it would only take one step to become a fine art photographer, but my eyes were so fixed on the goal of being a commercial photographer, and I used to shoot a lot of fashion and whatnot, even though, it's only one step removed to do a different type of photography. I just couldn't see it as my world. So the commercial world not particularly liking my style and not embracing it fully, or me having to compromise quite a lot with my style or my content, it made me realize that I wasn't the best fit in the commercial world. So I took that as a positive, because I knew I wasn't in the right place, and I knew I was getting appreciated and better reception in a different place. And when I realized that, it was that kind of eureka moment of like, yeah, I've found a home now. I know exactly where I need to be. And it's crazy, because you would just think, well, a photographer is a photographer. Like, if you're making all these crazy kind of cinematic things, like, do you not think that why wouldn't you want to put that in a gallery? Why, people are asking you for prints and things like that. I mean, I always used to get asked for prints, and I never connected the dots. And then once I started, visiting galleries and speaking to people, I just realized that I was in the wrong place. And so that's kind of when I was able to shift my focus and everything kind of lined up. And I kind of realized that the commercial world wasn't really for me.
Right. Well, that's a good realization to have too, and to realize that you don't fit in, that your style isn't embraced by them. As far as the darkness that you mentioned,
Yeah.
now, do you mean in subject matter dark, or do you mean like intentionally dark?
Both, really. Yeah. I mean, for me, I mean, this is going to make me sound quite cynical, but I find the commercial world, especially the fashion world, very kind of hollow. And I would be more interested in kind of inserting interesting narratives and referencing different icons and different kinds of iconography. And the clients weren't interested at all. They just want a pretty face, or they just want to show their whatever they're selling in the best light. So I always found it quite hollow. So for me to try and inject anything interesting, it always just kind of was never appreciated. So yeah, to answer your question, it was I kind of lean towards the kind of dark cinematic, visually dark, as in I like things quite dark. Like a lot of my work is set in the like nighttime, but also in kind of dark content. So a lot of my work is quite ambiguous, but some of it's quite dark and shady. Yeah, it just was never ever appreciated. It was both the dark content and the kind of dark visual of it.
Yeah, I love it. And you before the interview, you sent me something that you're working on, which is really cool, and I'm looking at it right now. Do you, because like you said, it's like cinematic in nature, and each piece really does tell a story, and you could just stare at one of these things for like an hour and kind of trying to figure out what the story is, or telling yourself like your own story. And I'm sure for each viewer, it's something different. Everybody's going to be telling themselves a different story. Do you, when you go into like a shoot like this, and you have an image in mind, or kind of a story to tell in mind, does it end up being exactly like your plan, and does it end up telling the story that you want to tell, or do you kind of switch it up on the fly, and or switch it up, switch it up during the shoot, and then switch it up during the editing process to retell a kind of a different story?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I was thinking about this earlier. I mean, I always have a definite idea in mind. Like I said, a lot of my work takes years to produce. Like just one image can take a long time to produce, and so I kind of have a definite idea. I have these kind of images in my head that I want to kind of get out, and so the image that you're referring to, with the upturned police car, I had that idea for a long time, and so I was working on it for a while. So yeah, I did have it, but I think especially for photographers, you don't want to be too rigid with the idea. So when everyone's on set and you're like, okay, everyone's got get this person to stand here, get this car to look here. I think it's good to be a little bit flexible. So even when we were shooting, we shot a few different options, but I do have a definitive idea. I have a definitive story that I want to tell, that I need to get out of my system. So that tends to be the way that I work. But saying that, I do retouch on the images and whatnot, and sometimes I do feel a bit more like a painter than a photographer, in the fact that you may start working on an image and you may think you may want to add something else, or you may want to make something darker or lighter and stuff. And I kind of feel like in that respect, you kind of changing as you go along. So it's not really a photograph which is like an instance of, an instant in frozen in time. And it's the same with a painter. I'm sure painters will start a canvas, and as they start to build up, things will change. So I kind of feel more like a painter these days, and I feel like it's a better way to be, because you're not that rigid person, and if you find something, like I may decide, like like I say, we do a few different versions. If while I'm working I see the expression on a face is wrong, or maybe I get through it and I kind of feel like the tone of the image is changing, and I need to swap out an expression of a face, I will do. And that's the beauty of obviously being able to take time with the retouch, and really get every component of it looking and doing exactly what I want.
Right. Well, and going back to the piece that you sent me with the upturned police car, so it feels to me like it's like half of an image.
Yeah.
Is that intentional? Like, did you like have more of a scene and then cut it off, or is it just did you send me only part of the piece?
No, yeah, that's all the image. So
I love it.
I intentionally cropped it, and for your listeners, by the time this goes out, it will be on my. I'm going to put it on my Instagram, which I'll talk about later. But yeah, it's totally intentional. So I really like to keep things loose and ambiguous, and I liked that kind of mystery, and I like to in my images, there's quite often you don't always see people's faces and whatnot, and for me, people's imagination is better than any creative out there, and it doesn't matter who I cast as an actor or who or where we shoot. People's imagination is so much more powerful. So I like to leave things to people's imagination. So I cropped that image in a way that the kind of crowd of people are kind of off shot, and it raises more questions like you maybe not sure what's going on, who are the people, and for me, yeah, it's totally intentional. And photography, especially, you get a lot of sharp crops like that. So, yeah, it's completely intentional, and I'm glad that you felt that way about the image.
Right. Well, when you were shooting it, was there another half of that image, like more to it that you like had in there? Like, did you tell more of a story?
Yeah, that's fair. I did shoot all of it, so I do have the other people,
Right.
but the way I shoot really, really big files. So like that particular file I sent you, the original is like 150 megapixel image. So I like to produce really, really big prints, giant prints with lots and lots of detail. So the image is absolutely huge. So yes, there is more to it, but there never ever was going to be more to it. It's just I always shoot them things just for security, really, because occasionally I might want to nudge, the group of people. I might want to nudge them a bit to the right or a bit to the left. And I think that kind of comes back to my commercial work. And I know I kind of, maybe I bashed the kind of commercial world a bit, but it did give me a good foundation because we would always shoot things for safety, and we'd always make sure we got all the options and whatnot. And that kind of all them kind of habits that I learned in the commercial world that I still use today. It's a good way to be, because you don't want to be kind of halfway through an edit and think, oh, I'd really like to kind of edge something, or if only we had a version with this guy not looking, or it's all intentional. And like I said to you before, I can spend up to a year on an image, and so every single pixel has been looked and looked and looked at, and it's there. Every single pixel has deserved its place in that image.
Absolutely, man. Well, I love that, and I think it's difficult sometimes for people to remember the fact that, like you said, it's like that Hitchcock idea where like letting the viewer or the reader or whatever, the person that's consuming it, letting their imagination and their creativity run wild is often way better than telling them a defined story. And I know for me, like as a writer, brevity is a tool that I am trying to implement more and more. And that's kind of why I love Twitter, where you can only use like a certain amount of words. It's like you really have to be careful or be really aware of the words that you're saying and be really useful with the words that you're saying. So for me, like when I write something, it's really hard for me to like cut things out because I'm like, no, this tells the entire story. So my question is that difficult then for you when you do set up this huge shoot and you do have all these extra details or even actors that you cut out or models that you end up, they never see the light of the picture. They never get to have their moment in the sun for what it's worth. Is it difficult then for you to, crop that out in order to tell a better story for the viewer?
Absolutely, yeah, and it's great to hear that you're the same as a writer. But I'm totally the same, and it's something I battled with for a long time. And when I used to make films, obviously the filmmaking process is a lot longer and a lot more laborious. And you may spend half a day setting up one shot, and when you came to edit the piece together, you'd be like, well, you may have created this amazing shot, and you need to leave that out of the equation. Really, you need to be taking it for face value. You don't need to be thinking about the effort that was involved or the time that it took. It's like, do you need that piece of information to tell the story? And if that, and it's a yes or a no. And I've definitely got much better at that. And so there was the shoot that I did with the whale. We actually had three women as extras in the shot, and they never made it into the final piece. And I felt really bad for it, but it was to do with the narrative. And for me, the narrative was stronger because there's a little boy next to the whale, and he's on his own. And for me, the three women not there made a stronger narrative. So even though I felt bad for them for not being in it, you kind of have to be true to the image. And one of the things my degree tutor said to me was that I always kind of remember him saying was, what is the least amount of information that you can use to tell a story? And that can be painting, photography, even like you say, writing. And I kind of listen to that all the time, and I kind of repeat that in my head. And when I'm editing something, I'm like, do we need that piece of information? Do I need to see that person's face as a result? I definitely got much, much better at that. Because the original picture with the cop car, it wasn't as tight. It was a little bit more open. And I just kind of cropped in a little bit tighter because just made things a little bit more intense, and there's a little bit less information, and sometimes less is more.
Absolutely, less is more. Was that a real whale in that image?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
it was.
Everything in that whale was shot on the same day.
Oh wow!
We got lucky with the weather, and it's just one of them things. It's we had a tip off about the beach and whatnot, but again, it was just an image that was years in the making, and I don't like talking too much about the work because I like the work to do the talking, but it took a lot of work to get to that point.
Wow. Well, I just imagine that a beached whale is like a very rare thing, and there'd be like a lot of public around to check out that kind of event. Are there lots of beached whales around you? Like, does that happen also?
No, not at all. England and whatnot, not really, no.
Yeah.
And from the image, everyone's kind of dressed in period clothes and whatnot as well. So it took a lot of organising, a lot of luck, and a lot of time and a lot of work. But hopefully it all paid off.
That's cool. Yeah, it's one of my favorite of your pieces, man.
Thank you very much.
No, of course, dude. Well, I wanted to talk about doing these like historical pieces too, like how you go to. Well, maybe you can describe for the audience like how you are able to capture those like pieces of history. It feels like it really does feel like those pictures came from the actual Civil War or the actual time period that you're trying to capture. Can you talk a little bit about how you are able to do that? Because I think it's genius.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks very much. Yeah. I mean, like I say, maybe it all started when I was 14 and I started studying history, and I was always been interested in history and whatnot, and I just find it a bit more of an exotic and interesting time. So for the listeners that don't know my work is always kind of set in the past. It's not kind of modern narratives. A lot of it, I'm kind of interested in that kind of like 50s Americana vibe to it. But I'm kind of loose in what era it is exactly set. But I find the kind of clothing and the cars and the kind of content more interesting in the past. And so I've kind of experimented with a few different eras. But I just like to be authentic. When I kind of have a story that I want to tell and I feel like an era is right for it, I kind of go for it. And I try and be as authentic as I can with it. So all the clothes and everything needs to be right. And I kind of work it from there. Sometimes inspiration comes from just a prop. I'm always buying props, and I've got all sorts of different things. I'm always on the lookout for interesting things. I'm always location scouting. I'm always finding things. And the crazy thing is, sometimes some of these locations that I find I don't use for years and years, and it's just building up all these different things, all these different elements, and then they kind of come together like a puzzle. But the main thing is just being authentic, and I just find it a bit more interesting. Like some of the narratives, like you say with the beached whale one, I just think if I'd have maybe shot that in a modern day thing, it would have, I don't know, I just wouldn't have found it as interesting, and maybe people would have thought of it more as just a snapshot. And I like people to kind of slow down, and I think if you're kind of scrolling on someone's feed or you're walking through an art gallery, it kind of stops people because it's the work in content looks old, but like technically, it's very vivid colors and whatnot, and I think hopefully that kind of stops people and in their tracks, and they want to know more, and they're thinking, well, it can't be a snapshot, it's not in black and white, it can't be from the 50s. So yeah, it's that kind of mix of the two really. And for me, like I said, it's just about trying to be authentic to it. I just find the past more interesting than the present.
Yeah, me too. Sometimes I just want to get in a time machine and go back.
Yeah, do you do that with your writing? Do you write in the past?
No, I don't. I'm actually more of like a future writer, but I do love the nostalgia of thinking about the past, even as far back as dinosaurs.
Okay, no, that's cool. I know. I've heard that I've heard before that you're a fan of the dinosaurs, and
Yes.
I'm the same. And I would be. I would never ever write off the future either. As in, I could see myself maybe producing work in the future, set in the future, or set in the past. I just feel like the present day. It doesn't really interest me. The other thing as well is I find that it would date very quickly. If you've got everyone, we just pick a few fashions from 2017. If you put them people in them fashions, doing them with a load of fidget spinners, which is the kind of the thing of the day, it will date very quickly. And for me, I like working in the past because it kind of becomes timeless, because if it's some 50s Americana, it's always going to be 50s Americana. So I like working in them eras because it's interesting. But yeah, maybe the next one will be Spacemen. We'll have to watch the space.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'll try and squeeze a dinosaur in if I can.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate that. Well, can you talk about using like antique cameras too, and like why you do that, and then some of the difficulties that maybe come from it?
Sure, yeah. I mean, for some of the big pieces, they are actually shot on digital, but I do sometimes shoot on film, and a lot of my personal work I shoot on film, and yeah, it slows you down, and I really, really enjoy the process of shooting on film. I'm not this kind of hipster photographer who's just bought a Leica and just leaves it in the coffee shop and never really takes any pictures. I do actually shoot film, and I do enjoy it, and for me, it's that kind of it just changes everything. It slows you down. It makes you think about the frame. You can't fill up a 32 gigabyte card with like a million shots. My medium format camera, which I shoot, I think I maybe get 12 or 13 frames out of it. And usually I might go out with a few rolls. And so you've got to get the shot. You've got to get it right. So I like that. And even when I'm not shooting film, I kind of still take them ideas back into to the digital side of it. So yeah, there's definitely challenges and whatnot, and I've lost a few roles over the years. I do recommend it for anyone who's listening that might be interested in trying to maybe giving their kind of photography a bit of a jolt. Maybe try doing something which is a bit different. Maybe try film, not because it's fashionable, but just because it changes the way that you think about things. And if it's costing you $1 or $2 a shot, it really will slow you down when you think about the processing and whatnot involved.
Right, and not just that, but like you said, changing things up. We've been talking a lot on the show recently about when you get settled in. When you start to really master something, or something starts to become like a habit, like a habitual thing. It's like you're not challenging yourself, thinking about things in new ways, and trying to discover. Not necessarily more challenging things, but different ways that you're not used to, and really making yourself uncomfortable.
Totally, yeah. I think it's a great idea. I think for any kind of creative, just to step out of your current situation is a great thing to do, because you just never know where it may take you. Just to see things with another set of eyes, it could be worth so much. And I think we're all guilty of it, and we kind of get into comfort zones and whatnot. But just trying things from the time to time might just, even if it's the wrong decision, you may just realize that it's just one avenue that you didn't want to go down, but it could very well open up a whole new world for you.
For sure. Well, let's get into sharing work, because one of my favorite things about your Instagram feed is that obviously your work shouldn't be consumed by just like scrolling through your feed or like the grid form. Like each image deserves like being clicked on and then like maybe even being saved and opened up to kind of explore the image and spend time with the image. But when you do that, then you can see the comments that you've written, which I think are awesome because you write a little facts about the shot and like fun facts about some of the things like that have happened behind the scenes or things that people wouldn't know at first glance. So can you talk about that? Because I think it's so important for people to do stuff like that, to really share their share information or share the story about the piece.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, and it's nice to hear someone saying that they enjoy that element of it. Because writing for me isn't a strength of mine, but I do make the effort to write quite long captions when I drop a new piece, like I will be soon. I will write a big description of it, and like you say, I think it just adds to the work and it kind of enhances it. We've all, a lot of us use social media, and it's very, very quick, and people are writing, maybe a few words, and especially Instagram, it's a lot of people don't tend to bother, or they'll just write, they'll just use 30 hashtags, and for me, that's all detrimental. I want to be adding something to enhance the work, and because a lot of people look at the work, sometimes they think, oh, it's is it mine, or is it real, or what's going on? And because a lot of it, the devil is in the detail. Like there's so much detail in some of the props, and some of them are kind of quite crucial elements to the story. It is frustrating to use the medium of something like Instagram, because it's very hard to show a big image on the tiny screen. So I use the kind of descriptions to kind of help give the story and give the backstory. And like you say, I put a few little fun facts in because these shoots, things go wrong, and I just like to share a little bit of my world in that respect, and hopefully it all enhances the image.
No, I think it definitely does enhance it.
Well, I'll keep doing it then. That's good to hear.
No, for sure. Well, you talked a little bit about how much time these things take. So I was wondering, maybe you could get into the idea of time. You talk about slowing things down, but does it ever feel like it's like too slow, like the process of it, like setting everything up and then editing it and then, as you mentioned, dropping it? Does it feel like it's an ongoing process that takes too long?
Absolutely, yeah. Sometimes, I can spend easily 100 hours on an image photoshopping it. Like, I'll kind of go back to it and do things. The images do take a lot of work, and I'm willing to do that because I want it to be absolutely right. And my output for fine art has reduced because I spend a lot of time on it. So I wouldn't want to compromise on that, but I am very, very aware that the work takes a long time to produce. The one way I do get around that is that I'm usually juggling quite a few projects at the same time. So like when I say to you things are years in the making, they are, but I usually am juggling a few things at the same time. So it kind of, each one is kind of edging towards the end. And that kind of makes things a little bit easier because I'll kind of go through little spells where I might not be putting much on my Instagram, but doesn't mean I'm not working. It's just that I may be working on a few things at the same time. So that's the way that I get around it. What I would say to your listeners is that you do have to be careful that you don't spread yourself too thin. And in the past, I've probably got about 30 different projects on the go at the moment, all at different stages of production. But personally, it's probably a bit too many, even for me. And I think people need to find that kind of happy medium. If you're a painter, you may have, a few different canvases on the go, or if you're an illustrator or whatnot, I don't know. But I think you just got to try and find that number and just try and kind of bounce between the different projects. For me, each project enhances the other projects. So even though I'm on everything for a long time, it almost makes them better because I could be looking for a particular item of clothing or a particular prop for one shoot, and while I'm doing that, I'm still thinking about the other shoots. Or I may find an amazing location that I wasn't even thinking about that could be perfect for a different shoot. So I kind of have a few things on the go, and that way it keeps my output at a reasonable number. If I was just doing kind of one at a time, like one per year, yeah, I mean, I think I'd probably go crazy. But at least having a few on at the same time, it kind of, for me, I like to work that way, and I find that it actually improves the work.
Well, do you have any other resistances? Anything that holds you back?
Yeah, I mean, I really like the way that you say resistance, and I think resistance is the best description of it that creatives face. I mean, some people will call it self-sabotage, some people will say it's procrastination, some will say, oh, it's the lizard brain, but I think the description of resistance is the best. And, I'm just as susceptible to resistance as everyone. But I think the main thing is for the listeners is that they need to understand is that if they can listen to that resistance and use that as a bit of a moral compass to know what's happening, you can kind of dial that volume down a little bit, and your brain might be telling you not to do something, or maybe don't take that risk, or maybe don't do some kind of ambitious shoot. But I kind of listen to that, and once you know where that voice is coming from, it's a good thing, and I just try not to listen to it. So yeah, I am most definitely susceptible to resistance, but I just try not to listen to it and try and just use it positively to motivate me to do things.
Right. Find a way to turn it on its head.
Absolutely, yeah. If your gut is telling you something, then you do want to listen to it, but it's a lot of the time the lizard brain just wants to watch Netflix and just chill out, and you do need to push yourself. And I think just being able to know that voice is a normal thing that we all hear, and just to use it to your advantage is the main thing, really.
Yes, my relationship with my resistance is Netflix and chill.
It's totally understandable, and it's okay to do it in doses, but the main thing is that you know about resistance, and the main thing is you know where that voice is coming from. And we're all guilty of it, And the thing that I was talking about with having two different projects on the go, even just having two projects on the go, for me, I recommend that to a lot of creatives, because what happens is you bounce from one project to the other. So like with the Upturn Cop car, I got to a point where I needed a little bit of space from it, and there was a bit of the image that I needed to work on, and I wasn't. I didn't want to do it right now. So you either do something like Netflix or whatnot, or you jump onto your other project. And what I find is that if you've got at least two projects on the go, when your lizard brain tells you that you don't want to do something because it's a bit hard, it's okay to give in every now and again, but at least you're moving on to something more productive. So it's that idea of, at least if you've got two projects on the go, when the resistance does kind of start, the volume on the resistance does start to kind of increase, you're still doing something productive with it.
Yeah, I usually have like 3 projects going, and that way when I get sick of something or I need a break or a distance from something, like you said, I have a choice. It's not like sometimes I'm like, oh, but I don't feel like doing that other thing too. At least you have like a choice, and you can pick, the best, the best option at the moment.
Exactly. I mean, you know what it's like as a kid. Like, your parents would say, "Oh, go and tidy your room," or go and you've got to do your homework and whatnot. And you would find the most obscure task to do, because your brain would be like, "Well, you're not doing the thing that you want to do. You might not." You might not want to do your homework, so you'll tidy your room. And it's like, a kid wouldn't want to tidy the room, but it's the better of the two options. And I think that's the thing as adults. Once you realize that we still have these resistances and we still have these little voices, as long as you're using it productively, you can use it to your advantage. Because the second you jump onto that second project, that lizard brain quiets down and is like, okay, I'm happy. I've avoided that thing that I wanted to do. But actually, you're just doing something else that you needed to do anyway.
Absolutely, man. Well, before we get to the final push, I was wondering, do you have any resources, anything at all that inspires you on a daily basis when you need that kind of inspiration, and that maybe could inspire us as well?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of like quite open to it. Unfortunately, I don't really have any kind of recommendations of like amazing films or anything that I could suggest. Like for me, it's always just this idea of just being open to other things. So as I've mentioned at the start of this, that my kind of entry into photography was from a very, very different tangent to the rest of the world. And I'm the same with my influences. So I just try to keep an open mind to everything. So I will try and watch obscure films, or I will go to random art galleries to see things that I may not be interested in initially. So I would just say, just try and keep an open mind to things, and just try new things. It's crazy how these things will inform you, and it may just plant a few seeds now for future things. So that's kind of where I go. The one thing I did want to mention really about time was about Parkinson's law. I'm sure some of your listeners know about it, but I use Parkinson's law a lot to help manage projects. So for those that don't know what Parkinson's law is, it's a law that says that the amount of time that someone has, to do a task that's how long it will take to complete it. So it kind of work always expands into the time that you give it. In the same way, when you was at school, you'd usually do the homework like 5 minutes before it was due. And again, listening to resistance and listening to Parkinson's law, I use these things to my advantage to get jobs done. So like with that Instagram picture I was telling you about, that's going to go. Making yourself accountable by saying, okay, I want this image to go online at a particular date. I find I can use that to my advantage to get work done. Because when you become accountable to people and you post something online, it's a great motivator.
Absolutely. I'm a huge proponent of Parkinson's law, and it's one of the reasons why in January I did this last year, and I'm doing it again this year. And this episode will probably be up in January, so hopefully motivating people in making a New Year's resolution, like a big project that you want to accomplish in 2018, or if people are listening later, in 2019, in an entire year, and then just finishing that entire project in January. Like cramming it all into January. Like if it's going to take you an entire year to do it, if you give yourself 2 years, it's going to take you 2 years to do that. If you make it 6 months, you could do it in 6 months. If you hold yourself accountable, if you hold it to 1 month, you can do it. Like you can find the time. It's just a matter of cramming that time.
Absolutely. And it's crazy how work gets done when it happens. And, when we were trying to organize this interview and whatnot, it happened because we made it happen and we set a date. And the second you set a date, everything falls into line and the job gets done. And that's why I think, I sometimes will drop like a little preview on Instagram or I'll send a quick tweet just to say something's coming live in the next few days or next week. Because of Parkinson's law, it means that the job will get done. And so it's great to hear that you use it, and it's great that I hope a lot of your listeners take advantage of that as well.
Absolutely, man. Parkinson's law, very, very powerful. When the job needs to get done, it gets done.
It does. That's absolutely. That's the best description of it.
Absolutely. Paul, this has been awesome, but it's time for the final push. And this is where I ask you to reach through the microphone and grab the shoulder of one of the listeners that you've already really inspired today, and just give them your best final words of advice and really push them to pursue their own creative passions.
The idea that I wanted to kind of share with your listeners today is about the way that I always feel like life is a numbers game. And I know that's a little bit of a cliche, but I just feel that if you kind of increase the numbers in life, you actually improve your luck. And I'm a strong advocate that you kind of create your own luck. And if you kind of look at a numbers game as being, the more meetings that you go to, or the more work that you create, or the more people that you talk to about things, the more you do of anything, the more chance it will have a positive effect on your life. And for me, I would say to any creators out there that are looking for that kind of creative push, or are thinking or trying to keep being creative in life, is just life is a numbers game. Increase the numbers, and you may be surprised what comes out.
Absolutely. Yeah. People wait around for their kind of lucky break, but you really have to ask yourself, what are you doing? Like, how often are you putting yourself out there? How far are you putting yourself out there? Because the more, like you said, life is a numbers game. So the more you do that, the better your odds.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, I don't want to try to explain everything away with science, but it's just that, the mathematical numbers is that, for the listeners out there, there's an interesting book called The Luck Factor by Richard Wiseman. And it talks about how luck is, they do some kind of mathematical studies and scientific tests just to try and improve people's luck. And a lot of the time is numbers game. Or you've got, we can all apply them sort of things to our own lives. If you send 100 emails, you're more likely going to get a reply than if you only send one. And I just feel like you can apply that numbers game to everything in your life. And if you're a painter or anything, you just got to put the hours in, and the more that you do of anything, the better.
For sure. And the more you can kind of expand your horizons too. If you don't see that one email as this like one opportunity, this one shot to get something, if you instead look at all these numerous opportunities that you could have, some in directions that you didn't think you would go before, then it's not as hard when you get that rejection of something that you might have originally seen as like your only shot, your only big opportunity. If you can kind of expand your horizons and see how many different opportunities there are for you and go for them all, then that's just going to help your mindset so much.
Absolutely. And I think that's the problem with social media, is that you tend to see this kind of created, edited version, and you always see all the success stories. And if you actually believed everything you saw online, you'd kind of think everyone just hit it out of the park every single time. And that's the thing, is that life isn't like that. And you do have to kind of put the work in. And I think if you asked anyone's success story, there's always failures there. It's just the fact is that they just tried that one extra time, and that could just be enough to make the difference.
Absolutely, man. Well, dude, Paul, thank you so much for coming on the show today, for giving us that push. I really appreciate it. I really love hearing your story. I love your work, and thanks for giving me the first glimpse at your new piece, man.
You're very, very welcome.
Cool. And people can find Paul at his website, thatpaul.com, and on Instagram, he is Paul Adshead, and we'll have that as well as everything we talked about today linked up at the show notes page at yourcreativepush.com/Paul Adshead, ADSHEAD. Paul, thanks again, brother.
You're welcome.
Oh man, my thanks once again to Paul for coming on the show. Two really important points that I wanted to bring up from this episode, and it's funny because both of them were possible title options that I wrote down. The first one was the one that stuck, which is less is more. And as we talked about in the episode, sometimes it is difficult to kill our babies when we're setting up these amazing shoots or writing these novels or painting these large pictures, these big ideas that we've had in our heads. Sometimes it is interesting, or an interesting idea to toy around with, to take some of that out completely, just to erase it from the painting, or cut it out from the song, or whatever it is. Our art or our creativity is our relationship with our viewer, even if that viewer is only us. And to let the viewer's imagination run wild is often a very effective tool to let them tell their own stories and take a little bit of that control away from the situation. It can be an interesting experiment if you're not used to it, because it liberates you. It makes you realize that these grand ideas that you had planned out, sometimes all of those details aren't necessary in order to convey not necessarily the message, but the emotion that you want to give to the viewer, the listener, whatever it may be. Just something to try out if you haven't thought of that before. Now, the second thing was what Paul talked about in his final push, how life is a numbers game, which is interesting because it can seem like a contradiction to that first point about less is more. And this is something that we talk about on the show often, how you have to just put yourself out there, not be afraid of criticism, not be afraid of rejection, to just continue to keep putting yourself out there, to kind of build up a tolerance to rejection, to criticism, so that it becomes easier and easier for yourself. Now, if you're already a pro at that first thing, when it comes to approaching your art, and you're very good at using less, sometimes you might want to translate that into the promotional aspects of your art when it comes to putting yourself out there into the world. And it is, of course, not true that if you build it, they will come. Just because you create something amazing, it doesn't mean that the whole world is going to come flocking to it when you put it out there on a brand new Instagram account, and you don't put any hashtags and you don't put any effort into having people come to you. And it can be very underwhelming sometimes when you do that thing, when you put it out there and just hope that people are going to come flocking, and then they don't, and it can just stop you from creating more. So I just want to remind you that just because you're good at coming at your art with a type of minimalist approach where you do allow the viewer to do the most of the work, that doesn't mean that you're going to find that same success when it comes to actually finding people to look at your work, for finding eyeballs to actually look at your work and have that experience. And sometimes you do have to put yourself out of your comfort zone when it comes to promotion. And it feels icky and it feels weird, especially if you are that of the brevity mindset. But just push yourself a little bit every single day to keep putting yourself out there, to keep pushing those numbers like Paul was talking about, because life really is a numbers game. And the more that you do put yourself out there, the better your odds. On our next episode, we have Amber Kane. Amber was a high school art teacher for 8 years in a public high school, but she was often threatened that her program would be cut, and she was asked when she would get over her creativity kick. So she made the decision with no solid plan in mind to resign. So she quit and moved into an abandoned home with no kitchen, no hot water, no electricity, none of that stuff. And she spent the next 3 years rediscovering her love for art and teaching. And she comes on the show next week to tell us all about that journey. It was a great conversation and a really insightful look into what can happen when somebody does try to stifle your creativity, but that desire to be a creative person and to also teach other people to be creative people is just too strong. If you want to find out more about Amber, you can find her on her website at amberkane.com. That's AMBERKANE.com. Or you can find her on her other website, theunstandardizedstandard.com, or on Instagram, she is teacher.kane. Or you can find all those links as well as links to everything we talked about today with Paul at yourcreativepush.com/275. But that is all I've got for you today. So hopefully you were inspired to go and get that work done. So go and get it done. And we will be here for you next week if you need the push again. I love you guys so much. Go get some amazing work done, and we will see you next time. Bye. Never miss a push. Head to yourcreativepush.com/subscribe to find the easiest way for you to subscribe to the podcast.